or the cloud.
Welcome to Edgy Conversations. We're just really thrilled to have Leanne Blackard with us today to talk about Wild Church and some other things. Leanne was in theological studies at VST, and then was spirited away by the United Church of Christ, was ordained and served in California for a time, and then we won her back into the United Church to our great joy. So with that brief introduction, Leanne, I'll turn it over to you. Tell us what's going on.
Great, thanks, Rob. Yeah, my story has an interesting language we've used here is pivot. I can't remember how many years ago it was, but I reached out to Edgy in the United Church to apply for Embracing the Spirit grant. I was working in ministry with Mount Paul United Church in Kamloops in British Columbia, and we had someone come to us and ask for assistance because their family was in the hospital there, and they couldn't afford a hotel room for even at the hospital rates for the time they needed to be there, and they were just desperate for some way to be able to stay close to their family member. And so we worked out a situation for them, but it made us wonder how many other people found themselves in that situation where their family was in the hospital for an extended stay and they just couldn't afford to be in town. And so we started looking around and talked about creating a ministry called Care B&B, sort of based on the Airbnb model, but people who would be willing to share their homes for a minimal amount of money with people coming into town for the hospital. And so we applied for and received a grant to explore this further. We worked with the local United Way. We were just rolling with it, and we kept running into roadblocks. And the bottom line ultimately became that it was hard for people to get their insurance companies to cover such stays. And so ultimately we weren't able to make Care B&B happen. And it took us, I think we worked on it for close to a year trying to make it happen. And it didn't happen. And so so I called Carla Leone and said, well, Carla, we've tried and we're not going to be able to use the money that's left from the grant for Care B&B because it's just not going to happen. And so we want to know what to do with this money. And she said, I think you should keep it and see what else emerges, because it's very possible that a different ministry might emerge, and then you'll be all set for that. And so the church banked the money for a time, and then a few years later, I think it was a couple of years later, maybe even more, I became involved with a group called Animus Institute out of the States, and went on a retreat on Vancouver Island that they were hosting. And in my own spiritual walk, I had found that I connected more and more with God in the natural world, and that spending time on the land, sitting under trees, just really refreshed my soul, nourished me, and I knew that there were others who did that. Many people who identify as spiritual but not religious will say, I take those long hikes in nature and connect with God that way. But I just found this was emerging for me, and I began questioning how I could be authentically in ministry with my congregation, for whom Sunday morning worship was a beautiful thing, when my own spirituality was sort of taking that shift. And it had been for, probably 7 or 8 years. And now I can look back and say, oh yeah, when I did this, it was leading to this, which was leading to that. And it's funny how the Spirit moves us and we're not really aware that the Spirit's actually moving us. So at the end of this retreat, my guide knew that I had been wrestling with my spirituality, with my authenticity in the church. And he just leaned into me on the last day during our ceremony and said, have you ever heard of Wild Church? And I was like, Wild Church? What's that? And so I came home and did some research and discovered there's an actual growing movement of churches, communities that practice spirituality on the land. And it really is, for me, it's fascinating. It's sort of like a return to the Garden of Eden for me. I often liken it that way, because in our creation story, we're told that God created all things and humans last. And then that everything lived together in harmony in this space. And God was present fully in that space as well. And so I like to say at some point in time, we decided to build 4 walls with a roof on it and say, this is where God is, and this is where we experience the presence of God. And we lost that. It feels to me like we lost that sense of God's presence in the natural world all around us always too. And so I began exploring it, and I found out that one of the women who founded, there's an organization called the Wild Church Network, which is a collection of people who have done wild church, who are interested in wild church, who want to know more. And I found out that she was going to be in Bellingham, Washington, on a visit. And so I went down and met with her and just talked with her to find out more about what wild church is. And it just felt like, yeah, this is a very cool thing to invite people to be out on the land, to be out in the wide, expansive sanctuary of the natural world, and to really praise and really encounter holy in a totally different way. And so I had a friend who was with me on that retreat on Vancouver Island, and on the way home we talked about it, and we both felt like, whoa, there's something to this. And we got home and we had a third friend who wasn't able to join us, but had been part of the book group studying the book that prompted us to go on this retreat. And we shared it with her, and she was like, oh yeah, sign me up, I'm in for this. So the 3 of us decided we were going to try wild church. And if it was only the 3 of us who came, that was okay, because for us, it did what it needed to do. And so we started it on a monthly basis in Kamloops. And we started it with the intention of reaching out to the spiritual but not religious group. All those people that we meet who say that. And I've always felt like I totally understand and hear what you're saying, but I still believe our faith is meant to be lived in community. Jesus didn't walk alone. He walked and he gathered people around him. And so we wanted to do that same thing. So we intentionally didn't really share, like my congregation knew what we were doing and the other ministers in town, but we didn't really share wild church within the church with the intention of totally reaching out to people who, for whatever reason, were disenfranchised with church. And so we put up posters around town in the sporting goods stores. We went to the farmers market and engaged people there. And we just did a whole bunch of ways of reaching out into the community to say, hey, here we are, come and give us a try. I mean, we slowly built a base that way. And it was I had a thread. I want to try and recapture it. And one of the pieces was that in my, thanks to a woman I followed in ministry at one point, I didn't create, but I borrowed from her the idea of when we serve communion, we would break bread at the table for those who couldn't be at the table with us, but with that we wanted to include them in our prayers and in our community. And so one of my traditions was always the final breaking of bread would be for those people who are spiritually hungry but don't know where to find the bread of life. And so as wild church began emerging, and the more I thought about it, the more I thought, oh, this is the answer to that prayer. Like for those who are spiritually hungry but don't know where to find the bread of life. And here we're creating the bread of life in a totally new and different way. And in creating something that really nourishes people's spirits and souls in a way that's different than what happens on Sunday morning. And so the 3 of us kept going, and we ultimately got up to, I think we had 14, 15 people coming on a pretty regular basis before COVID hit. And we did one summer at Naramata Center, which is the United Church retreat center near us. And the next summer we didn't get invited back to Naramata, so we reached out to Sorrento Center, which is the Anglican retreat center, which is an hour from Kamloops. And we said, hey, like this is what we do, and we'd be interested in doing that there if you're open to it. And not only were they open to it, but when we sat down with them, they said, we're not thinking a one-time summer thing. We're thinking an actual partnership with you guys because you're doing the kind of ministry that we want to do here as well. And so out of that, so it's funny, how it's that old when one door closes, a window opens somewhere else. And so out of that week at Sorrento Center, we actually did 2 weeks at Sorrento Center last summer in the midst of COVID, with all the protocols in place. we now have a partnership with Sorrento Center that's growing and creating more and more events. In fact, on Sunday, we'll be doing a solstice gathering there and having Kenton Thomas, a local Indigenous storyteller, sharing stories of the land. And it's just a beautiful thing to me. And we now have a wild church plant in Sorrento that meets once a month. And in between we did the region did faith fests where they went into different areas and talked about different ministry opportunities and what was working for congregations and what wasn't, and really trying to inspire and encourage local congregations as they sought new ways of being and new ways of reaching others. And so we were in Nelson, BC, at a faith fest, and a woman from Kelowna was there, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, like wild churches sounds like a neat thing. Can we talk more about it?" And so at that point in time, my partner had just moved to Kelowna to be in ministry with one of the congregations. So this time we took a different approach. This time we said, we're going to start in the church, and we're going to see what happens when we build that community in the church. And so we let people know what we were doing. We reached out to 5 or 6 congregations that are here in the Okanagan Valley and said, we really want to talk with you about this and let you know what it is and see if there's any interest in this. So we met, I think that day we had a dozen people there. We talked about it. They generated ideas. We said, okay, how do we go forward with this? And together in that space, we created what's now Wild Church Okanagan, with an understanding that it's not just serving the Kelowna area, but beyond Kelowna up into Lake Country and down into West Kelowna and there. And so that group grew out of the church. So for us, we've always sort of been let's try this and see if it works. So we tried one way in Kamloops and it worked. And we tried a different way of building it in Kelowna and it worked. And Sorrento just sort of was like, whoa, let's do this. And will you come and do this with us? And we also have some interest in Vernon now. And so we're hopeful that as soon as our restrictions are lifted, we'll be able to be in conversation with Vernon about a possible wild church plant there. The fun thing has been that it grew not just me. I haven't been in this ministry solo. There's always been the 3 of us. Michelle Walker, Leslie Comrie, and I have worked on it from day one together. We've had so many meetings of how do we do this, what's next, and it's been fun for us to watch it grow and build. And now we have a 4th woman who's joined us, and all 4 of us have actually been through. There's a new seminary of the wild, which is training people in ministry, and in ministry in this way. And now all 4 of us have participated in that, and just it's been a phenomenal journey. We're quite excited. The one thing that I haven't shared is that once we got going, it became apparent that like this is my passion now, and it became apparent that we were going to need some funding even before we had grown into 2 plants, that we wanted to spend more time on it. And so and my congregation was struggling a bit financially and beginning to say, how do we do this? And I was at the top end of the pay scale, and you always hear that conversation with an ear to it, knowing that some of the struggle comes because your salary as a minister is a huge part of the budget. And so I thought, well, it would be interesting if I could apply for a grant and work half-time with Wild Church and half-time with my congregation. And so we applied for a local regional Embracing the Spirit grant. And we applied for a full grant, hoping we would get 50%. And it turns out that they thought, hey, this is kind of cool. We'll give you a full grant. And so I was able to step back from full-time ministry within a congregational setting into being a church planter with Wild Church on a full-time basis, which has been a true gift. And I credit that with a lot of how we've grown so quickly and so fast. I will share with you one of the last things I'll share with you before I let you ask me some questions, which you might have some, is that not this past weekend, but 2 weekends ago, we had our first training event. And one of the things that we acknowledge is that Wild Church is growing, and with 3 plants happening, I can't be everywhere and do it all. And the gals that helped me from Kamloops, all three of the other ones live in Kamloops. They're all volunteers, and so they can't also be everywhere. And so it became really important to us that we began training people in each community to support and provide some leadership. And so 2 weeks ago, on the weekend, we had a gathering and we did some training in the Circle Way, which is a circle communication style that I've been trained in. And we did that, and we had just a really amazing weekend together. And the last assignment they had was to go and create their own wild church experience, which we put them into 2 groups, which they would then offer to the rest of the group. And it was amazing. And they created just these really beautiful experiences. And so for me, it was it was just an amazing thing, because now I can see, in fact, now basically the Kamloops group is on their own, and I don't have to run over there every time. They meet twice a month. The Okanagan group meets twice a month. So now we're beginning to develop the lay leadership to assist and support these ministries in each community, with the hope that eventually they'll be standing on their own and not need the tomato hoop of my support. So I guess I could go on, Rob, but I know that we need to watch our time. So
that's wild. Yeah, that's such a beautiful story. And I love, well, let me first of all say, Wild Church and Nelson, BC have a very personal connection for me, because the last time I was there for a workshop, I was chased down from Pulpit Rock by a black bear, which was pretty wild. They said, yeah, you probably shouldn't walk alone at dusk. Oh, right. Anyway, I love that kind of image at the beginning, the first workshop of the recovery or a remembering of the Garden of Eden. That kind of spiritual experience of that experience, spiritual framing. And but the image that came to mind to me as well was a little bit of the Celtic wild goose chase. We thought we were doing a Airbnb, and that didn't work out. But even that, it was like this person, and we wondered. You said, and we wondered how many other people are in this situation, and then that didn't work out. And Carla wondered what you might do with the money if you kept it anyways. And so this curiosity, this turn this way and that way, and unexpected turns, like kind of the wild goose chase. So, but I'd be interested in your kind of take. What were the surprises that kind of stick out? It sounds like there were a few.
I think the surprise was the biggest surprise was when my guide on the retreat said, "Have you ever heard of Wild Church?" Because it totally wasn't on my radar. And the surprise on that was that as Leslie and I drove home, we drove by a field, and there were 2 eagles in the field, and they both kind of flew in and came down together, and we both just kind of looked at each other and went, "Whoa, that seems to be a bit of a sign." And I think another surprise for us has been that we started differently in Kamloops than we did in the Okanagan area, with intentionally not being in the church versus intentionally starting in the church. We find both communities have about the same percentage of church people versus unchurched. I don't, versus is such a, but anyway, church people and unchurched, or unchurched for lack of, there's a variety of reasons. And so it has intrigued us how it has just sort of balanced out there. And I say that, and I think that probably 60 to 70% of our participants are people who are in a church at this time. And the other 30 to 40% are people who are disenfranchised from the church. We have a couple who have come who are Buddhists. We've had a couple come who are pagans. And so it's really sort of become a bit of an ecumenical gathering in a way. And so I think that was a surprise to us at how it shifted. But the feedback that we've gotten from people who are in the church is that what I do on Sunday morning feeds me in a certain way, and what I do with Wild Church feeds me in another way. And between the two, I feel fully nourished. So that was pleasing to us, because we have never wanted to be in competition with the church. That's not our goal. Our goal is to reach people in a different way and nourish spirit and soul in a different way. Um, so I think that's been a surprise. I'm trying to think if I think, yeah, like one surprise has just been how fast it's happened. Like literally we started this full time 2 years ago, and to think that we already have 3 church plants and um, possibly a 4th coming this year. And I just was in conversation with another community that wants to start a wild church possibly and wanted to pick our brain. I've been in conversation with the local campus ministry animator who's also interested in what it is. When we started, we were the only wild church in the United Church region. And now I think there's 6 or 7 other communities that are offering a type of wild church experience. So it really is a movement, and it really is moving very quickly. So moving quickly enough that some might consider it a noxious weed, right? Oh, look, here it is. Oh no, there it is. But we like to think it's better than that. So although noxious weeds have their place too.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, there's certainly energy and life in it. The spirits movement is all over this story for sure. I am struck by the way that this weaving together of different things, like Buddhists participating in ecumenical thing, it's kind of a new expression of really what was the United Church vision. It wasn't to create a new denomination. It was to somehow live out the truth that the body of Christ is one. Yeah. And maybe we should start acting that way, and not even, creation is one, God is one. Buddhist or no, the Buddhists wouldn't use that word, but right. One, they would understand the various aspects of that unity. So, and I'm fascinated. I want to hear about this 4th potential plant. And really the question is, what do you see on the horizon? Where do you see this heading next?
Yeah, we see a 4th plant, and then we see what we see emerging as this has developed, and especially now with the training session, the 4 of us just met on Friday and talked about what it means now that we've done some training and all of that, and we kind of acknowledge that it's possible that, well, one of our commitments from the beginning has been that the United Church gave us the grant and the money to get this going. And so we've always been, how can we give back to the region? How can we say thank you for what we've done and share what we have, which is why we've done the Faith Fest. We've done Evolve with the young people. And whenever someone has said, can you help me? We try to step in and offer what we can to them. And so one of the things that we see coming, but we've never been able to see very far in the future and really know what's coming. It has been a wild adventure, but is that that there will be more and more plants, and we see the Kootenays especially as an area that are just ripe for this kind of ministry, and so we sort of anticipate that it might be that we continue to do plants and continue to raise up leadership in local communities, which means that, like, I would start a church plant. Like if I start the church plant in Vernon with local people there, then I would shepherd that group until they're comfortable enough to provide the leadership themselves. And then that opens me up to start another church plant somewhere else and continue to develop the local lay leadership. Because you don't have to be ordained to lead a wild church. You just have to really get the connection with the land and with God in the wild world. So.
Wow. Yeah, I love it. Literally, church plant, that image seems to fit so well with the whole wild church.
It does. And the interesting thing about that, we've talked about that, is that each one is different. It's not like we've got, okay, we have this packet of seeds and we're going to go plant we're going to go plant the same thing in every community. Each place grows up organically into what it's meant to be. And so each one looks a little bit different, has just a little bit different take on it. And the other communities that we've worked with look radically different. So, but it's all accomplishing the same thing for us.
Image of the gardener just tending the plant grows as it will, eh? just one more question, really. How has this impacted your own spiritual journey?
It's been huge. It's been huge because I remember when I was at VST and felt the call to ministry. I was actually in my congregation, which was Methodist at that point in time. And we were singing, "Here I am, Lord, is it I, Lord?" And I thought, man, I just finished a year of seminary trying to know God better, trying to understand God better. And I feel like it's more than that, and I need to continue this journey. And then it's been a journey, and in the time since I felt the call, I've done myriad things. I've been on a spiritual vision quest with friends who do the Circle Way training. I've walked bits of the Via de la Plata and the Camino in Spain, which was a really deepening my connection with God. And I can point to all these times when I was in the natural world and really fed me and nourished me spiritually. And so as that was growing and emerging in me, I kept thinking, like, how do I remain authentic in ministry when this is who I am? And so when this whole notion of Wild Church opened up, I thought, that's it. So for me, to be able to follow with passion and serve the church in the way that really feeds and nourishes me spiritually, and to be able to see other people for whom it does the same thing. My cohorts would tell you that each one of them is involved in this because for them, church wasn't feeding them anymore. It wasn't nourishing them spiritually, and they were trying to find something that did. And they've found it with Wild Church, and they love being part of it, and they bring beautiful leadership to it. So I guess for me, it's that piece, and for me, it's spiritually too. It's the wisdom of Creator is held in creation. All right, it's like this was all put together in a way for a reason, and we as humans have tended to believe that we have dominion over, and we have really started to see the natural world as commodity to be consumed rather than as neighbor to be in relationship with. And so for me to be able to return to seeing the natural world as full of my neighbors to be loved, for me to sit in, I have a little circle of 5 trees that I call my grandmothers, because I had 5 grandmothers. And this tree is these trees create such a space of compassion and energy. And so for me to sit in there is just to feel the presence of holiness all around me and holding me. And that has shifted my spirituality in a very big way. And I think in a very positive way.
Well, Leanne, thank you so much for sharing that story, but maybe even more for being willing to wonder and to say yes when the Spirit guided you or held something out. It's a living, growing, you said movement, something that's making new connections from church to non-church to ecumenical to different communities in different ways. It just is a powerful, powerful story. And I just want to start a Wild Church now in my spare time, if I can find any. But surely someone will, and I'll go.
There are several across Canada, and there's I wish I could remember the name of the church right now. But are you in Toronto, Rob?
Burlington, but yeah,
okay.
Close enough.
Oh, Burlington. I have a friend who's a Mennonite minister who has Wild Churches out there. I'll send you some information. But yeah, there's several across Canada, and they continue to grow. So one of our dreams is to host a national Canadian Wild Church gathering at some point in time, once we get past COVID and we can actually travel and be together in the same space. Soon, we hope.
I hope your travels bring you out here or vice versa, and we can meet in the wild at one point. Thank you again, and blessings on the next steps.
Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks for the opportunity to share my story.